that some of you may have in joining us today. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So jumping right in, if you have any questions, you can always drop questions in the chat later, but I'll explain all of that as we get started. So afternoon, evening, and morning as your time zone dictates. I'm Uche Amaechi. I'm a lecturer in education here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I want to formally invite you to today's Education Now episode. The Education Now is a webinar series designed to respond to dramatic changes in the field of education in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. In today's conversation, we're going to discuss the trauma left in the wake of the stacked crises of a lingering pandemic, racist violence, economic hardship, and pervasive inequality, and consider trauma-responsive strategies that can help both students and adults and hopefully lead to better and more just schools. As usual, today's episode is being recorded. You'll be able to view, well, you're watching us now, but you can also view later on our Harvard Graduate School of Education YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and also you can visit hgsc.me/ednow for recordings of this episode and future episodes. You can also submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the page, where you can also find a link to see the live transcript if that's helpful for you. Now, without any further ado, I want to welcome our two guests for today. So we've got Mark Tappan and Aysha Upchurch. Mark Tappan is a professor of education at Colby College. His focus is on social and personality development, trauma-responsive schooling, boys development, and social justice education. Tappan is co-author of an upcoming book, Trauma-Responsive Schooling, which outlines a novel approach to transforming American schools through student-centered trauma-responsive practices. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks, Uche. Thanks
for joining us. Excellent. And then we've also got Aysha Upchurch. Aysha is the lecturer on education and artist in residence at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's committed to youth advocacy, social inclusion, artistry development, and transformative education. At Hugsy, or HGSC, Upchurch launched and directs Hip Hop X, HHX, a collaborative lab for high school and graduate students to experience, explore, and experiment with hip hop arts in education. So I'm so excited to have both of you, Mark and Aysha, here today. I wonder if there's anything else that perhaps you'd like to say as to give a little bit of context of where you're coming from and how you're thinking about today's discussion. Maybe we can start with Aysha.
Sure thing. Good day. I was going to try to time it out, but just good day all, or evening. So thanks for that invite. Just to provide quick context. One, I'm born and raised north side of St. Louis, Missouri, which is very particular. Two, I am the youngest of four, which means whatever my older siblings did, I learned and did through participation, observation, and easy childcare. And that really has informed the amount that arts is in my life. And three, I'm coming to this conversation today as someone who, much like I am in real life, is an auntie. Like I'm an auntie, I'm a helper, I'm a support outside of those who are in the classroom and in the school building day in and day out. As someone who wants to help teachers, administrators, parents, families, figure out what's going to be the most beautiful way to incorporate arts into a really holistic, transformative educational experience. So shout out to those who are actually in the sandbox. I am your artistic auntie.
All right, Aysha Upchurch, artistic auntie, thank you. And Mark.
I don't know that I can follow that in any creative way, but anyway, thanks for the opportunity to provide context. Thanks to Barry and Uche and Jody and others for the invitation. I want to just say I'm representing my colleagues, Lynn Michael Brown and Kat Biddle. And Lynn and I are both proud alums of the Ed School back in the day. So it's great to be a part of this conversation. And Lynn, Kat, and I have spent the last 5 years working in partnership with a team of practitioners and a number of rural K-8 schools to test and refine practices to support student-centered trauma-responsive schooling and trauma-responsive systems change. And I'm excited to share some of our ideas with you all today.
Excellent. Thanks, Aysha and Mark. So before we jump in, I want to provide a little bit of context by way of perhaps giving some shared text of the definition of trauma we'll be using, and maybe giving a little bit more context for the discussion we'll be having. So I'm going to start out with a definition of trauma that the panelists and I kind of agreed on. So trauma, defined as an adverse experience, violation, or persistent stress in one's life that overwhelms the capacity to cope, typically has long-term emotional, psychological, and physical consequences. Trauma arises from a wide range of experiences and intersecting challenges, which can happen to anyone, that include physical and sexual abuse, violence, caregiver, substance abuse and addiction, physical and emotional neglect, loss of a parent, poverty, and for many, the toxic stress of persistent discrimination and systemic oppression. The essential features of trauma are disempowerment and disconnect from self and others. A couple of other things we wanted to just introduce. Children and adults in schools bring a wide range of life experiences with them. Sadly, we know that many of these experiences are traumatic ones. Research indicates that the majority of children have experienced at least one traumatic event, and that members of low-income groups and marginalized racial and ethnic groups are disproportionately affected and at risk. And for children and adults whose families were affected by COVID, we can expect that mental health challenges will linger. Mm-hmm. So today we want to focus on some of the strategies being used by teachers, students, and schools when navigating trauma. So I want to open up Mark and Aysha by just asking generally, like, how does trauma show up in schools? What does it look like? Maybe Mark, you can start this time.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that trauma can manifest in multiple ways in schools as anxiety, depression, sadness, self-harm, lashing out, loss of attention and focus. You know, there's a basic kind of fight or flight or freeze impulse that's engaged when facing dangerous, threatening situations. It's sort of a universal human responses. Trauma can also look like a lot like resistance, kids not doing their work, not caring about school, acting out, getting in trouble. We would say that as educators, we really have to resist the temptation to fall into the kind of deficit thinking trap and ask, you know, what's wrong with those kids? And instead, we really have to ask what's happened in their life, in and out of school, that has contributed to how they're acting in the classroom and in the school at large. And most importantly, what strengths do they bring to the table that can be marshaled on behalf of their own healing? So that's where I would start on that question.
Thanks, Mark. Aysha, anything you'd like to add?
The only thing I will add on top of that is I often do wonder as well for whom, how trauma shows up for students. When it's not so readily visible, they're performing well. I think over the past couple years and talking with particularly high school aged youth who can kind of candidly share how they've not been okay, but it doesn't look like it on the surface because the grades are okay. So I also think about how resilience and how resilience shows up, and we champion that might sometimes be a way of some students masking what's really going on and how they're trying to just manage and perform. So just want to give voice to the way that it can manifest without even manifesting, so to speak.
That's powerful. So being aware that trauma is happening, but also being able to see it in its many guises is one of the things that I'm hearing. And I'm wondering, what does trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive education mean to you, given this context?
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. You want to go first, Mark?
No, you go. You go first this time.
Yeah, because I'll let you give the beautiful legit.
No.
So I say there's something different between an answer and a response. So this is my response to that question. And as someone who's also coming to this work from a creative, from an artist, and particularly from an embodied learning, where's movement, where does body appreciation and love show up in our schooling? I encounter in the like literature that terminology, the diverse use of the terminology also makes me ask, like, well, should we be calling it? And what I think on a very practical ground level at the end of the day is that it is when you are designing a learning space, a classroom, a school, an experience, that you are designing it intentionally considering that maybe some of the content, maybe some of the activities might not be just an easy grab for all students. It is an awareness that students and even other adults in the building or in the sphere are coming from very different perspectives and experiences, and we don't know what the triggers are, and we're not going to get them all right. But it's bringing that awareness that, hey, I can't just have everybody read this story and think that ain't nobody going to be triggered by the violent content, or, so I think on a very basic level, I'm considering how to design spaces with awareness of the different types of triggers that could be in a room.
No, thank you. And Mark, before you jump in, I have to ask, response versus answer. Can you say a little bit more about that? Yeah.
Oh, me?
Yes.
Okay, so
I were making that distinction.
So a response to me means there is room for subjectivity, there is room for opinion, there's room for feel, where sometimes I think when people want an answer, it's that definitive thing that cannot have any holes in it. Yeah. So.
That's a great distinction, and it's helpful for me to actually get that. I was curious, and I'm sure a lot of other people were curious too. So thank you, Mark. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great distinction, and I'll provide a response that's maybe also a bit of an answer. And just to say, sort of, we think about like three key aspects of trauma responsive schools that really come from the work of Judith Herman and her, work 30 years ago, Trauma and Recovery, which is, trauma responsiveness means establishing trust and safety. Number two, it means promoting and encouraging voice, agency, and empowerment. And three, it involves building and restoring meaningful relationships to enable students and staff to reconnect with themselves, and with each other.
So, Mark, if I could stay with you for a second. So I've seen research to suggest that whole school efforts at creating trauma-sensitive culture are probably more effective than maybe one-on-one interventions. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more, it seems like you were heading in this direction, about how some school leaders or teachers may be trying to make trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed practices kind of a routine part of school life?
Yeah, so just really quickly, I'll just share two examples of strategies that we've used in the schools that we worked with. And they're like really simple, basic. One of them is we call some days, where every kid in the school, and these are small schools, so every kid and every teacher is asked to answer the question, someday in school, I would like to, and fill in the blank. And then the staff goes about trying to, make those some days come true for the kids. And they're just really simple things. Like, one kid wanted to sit in the principal's chair and eat M&Ms and talk to the principal. Another kid wanted to have recess with her sister, who she didn't get to have recess with. Another kid wanted to teach kindergarten class, and they wanted to teach by making snow using baking shaving cream. Lots of really interesting, sort of fun things that kids wanted to do to make school kind of a place that is meaningful for them. We've saw some really great success with that. And just a quick example, a principal said one of these schools said, some days make students feel wanted and whole and involved part of something bigger than themselves. It's building the happiness of students who come to school with something to look forward to. So it's not targeting individual kids who we think or suspect have trauma. It's really, again, a whole school approach. The other, really quickly, is what we call micro adventures, which are kind of outdoor experiential activities that kind of, informed and inspired by Dewey and others, that students actually get a chance to co-design, that are linked to the curriculum and learning standards. And so these are opportunities to go outside, to to, make a shelter, to do math on the playground, to just, experience school as a living, moving, learning environment. And, kids work together, they work with students, other teachers. And it's, again, really a powerful experience. So a parent, just a quick quote from a parent on this work says, our school has always been a homey place. Now it feels more electrified. So these are two just really brief examples of, play, fun, creativity, excitement. And they actually provide the conditions for what we call student-empowered social emotional learning. And we saw some great results from these. Academic achievement and engagement increased, school climate improved, attendance improved. Kids were better able to learn as a result of sort of participating in these kind of whole school efforts.
These are amazing examples. And I think you spoke to it at the end. As you were talking and giving the examples, I was saying, like, these sound like fabulous activities. I would have loved to do them, even if I didn't feel or know that I had experienced trauma. And then when you talked about social and emotional learning at the end, like, this is something that can be applied to all students, including those that have been identified as having experience. So
absolutely,
I love this idea.
Absolutely.
Aysha, you were nodding vigorously. Is there anything you want to add?
Because I like want to go to that school right now. Also, shout out to adults who are like, where's the room for our joy? And I think the other thing, I consider myself a joy ambassador. And I think in the beginning definition and framing that was offered, and what I've heard you say a lot, Mark, is like really around this term empowerment, and particularly student-led and student agentic type of empowerment versus I'm the adult in the room and I'm going to tell you how to be empowered. And I think that really is a critical point where it makes me wonder how the experience of going to school can be traumatizing for some of our students, because their voice, their presence, their very rich, nuanced identities are snuffed out for this sole focus on, let's get this test metric up. And this is not me being like anti-test. This is going, joy can't live outside of this experience. And so for the students who are maybe going through something that is identifiable as a triggering event, or for students who just feel like, oh my goodness, being back inside of the building after 2 years, or what, it's that I think joy is a universal human right and need, and that humanizing, those humanizing kind of, what I took from what you were saying, those are rehumanizing activities and engagement opportunities. And I just want to stand up for that. And as an artist and a creative, I never want to pigeonhole the arts. Like, it is not our responsibility to figure out how to fix all the mess that schooling set up. That's not what the arts are meant to do. The arts are not there to make test scores go up. The arts are not there to improve attendance. We are not the cute puppy to save everybody. The arts are part of a human experience, period. And so I think when we are inviting opportunities for joy for our students, our faculty, and our staff and our families, artistic and cultural expressions to be inside of the building, that's a way I also think that is very part and parcel to any type of trauma-informed or healing-centered educational design. So that's what I was nodding so like forcefully about, because it's like about bringing joy.
Yeah, I love that. And it absolutely is. We didn't exactly use that term, but it absolutely is. It's a great term to capture what we saw in the kids, and we tried to sort of make possible for them. So thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Excellent. Aysha, you brought up teachers and the adults in the room, and that was part of our initial framing. And yeah, there's been research suggesting that like focusing on staff mental health can have this whole school impact, similar to the last conversation we were having. So it's been 2 years, like teachers lived in the pandemic too. I mean, this is what you're saying. They are suffering, they've experienced trauma, maybe in different ways than the students have, maybe in similar ways, we don't know. And then also there's this idea of like secondary traumatic stress, where like caring educators working closely with trauma affected students or other educators can actually be influenced. So I'm curious, like, what are some ways that educators can address this, maybe integrating self-care into their daily practice? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so many thoughts that we can have for a different podcast, but I think the main kind of like headline or caption is that I hope, and to Mark's point, like where there's a whole school value, not just a practice and a checklist activity, but where there's a whole school value around the wellness and well-being of all the humans in the building. I think any of those one-off or in the behind the closed door of the room practices that teachers engage in, whether that's everybody gets a restorative moment or moments after lunch, or, I think when there's a value, then those things that educators do for themselves with students, or even before they come to the school building, is important. We've got a lot of teachers who are leaving and or have left because of the added reality of COVID and education, of COVID ed, pandemic ed. And so I would hope that every adult can find whatever that is for you, because that can be very specialized, a practice that you do to ground and center self before even entering the building. And then inside of the building, I'm a huge fan of collaboration, because so many of our schools also don't have school counselors in the building. And so teachers are expected to be this Swiss Army knife, be all things, and they can't. And so I wonder about, I think it's powerful when there's collaboration as a value in the schools, where we can partner with outside organizations and specialists to come and share that load, to be those aunties, those uncles, that extended village, so that teachers aren't feeling like they single-handedly have to figure it all out. And I think in programs that I've seen where collaborative interventions and efforts are in place with arts, or arts creative therapy, where they're relying on folks with that expertise to come in and help address that, that's been impactful versus asking the teachers to just try stuff on their own whims.
Mark, anything you'd like to add on this?
Just really quick. So I don't think I mentioned this clearly when I was talking about some days, but we tried to get teachers to, they filled out, they asked for their own wishes. We tried to make those happen. And that was another way to just, kind of provide that opportunity for teachers to have that experience of, joy and excitement as well. And it was harder. Teachers were, teachers have a sense of, what they need to do. And sometimes it's different than kids, but I love the examples that Aysha had to expand that and really provide opportunities for engagement and embodiment for teachers as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. So two undercurrents that I'm picking up. And these are also kind of jiving with some of the questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A. So relationships is like a very strong theme, because you're both talking about building a strong culture, and there's a specific type of culture we're trying to build, but you've talked a lot about building, I feel like, about relationships, whether it be student-teacher, teacher-teacher, teacher and admin. There's another question. Somebody mentioned, Aysha, I think you mentioned reaching out to other partners to help. As we start thinking about what's going on outside of the school and how that can help the school, there's also a question that I saw about when some of the trauma is going on or other things are going on outside of the school and the students' families, and how do you engage that? Because a lot of what we've been discussing is how do we respond in the school, which is, yes, responding to what's going on outside, but when you feel like some of the ongoing trauma is happening outside of the school, any thoughts on how to respond?
I will say through a bit of experience, because I did, before being at Harvard, I did play inside the public school sandbox a bit. And I'm a very empathetic person. That's probably a great asset, but also comes and bites me, because I want to try to fix it all and be all the time. And I think also the hard part is being able to establish some parameters. So my big heart cares around what's happening, but clearly what's happening outside the walls is coming in. I cannot fix outside the walls. I am an amazing human being, but I'm not a superhero. So that's why I believe the onus is on me to create with as much compassion and empathy inside this building, a space where people feel humanized. And that may feel like an avoidance type of response, but I mean, I have this expression, sorry if this is a little crass, but I eat, sleep, and go to the bathroom like every other human, right? And so we have limits. And so I think that's why partnership is particularly compelling. And I think effective when partnership is valued in the school, because you can, where you fall short, someone who is in the community can come partner inside of the school and be that effective bridge more than I can, particularly if I don't even live in the same community as my students. So I would say accept our human capability and limitations, but use that as fuel to design with love, with empathy, with humanization inside the spaces that we can be in.
Yeah, and I would have a similar response to say that genuine, real, authentic, honest relationships that can be developed with kids, should be developed with kids, can also be developed with families. If those are really happening, and they're hard, they're messy, they're complex, they're difficult, but if schools and teachers and are doing that, and that's the priority, then again, we have some evidence from our work in these smaller schools that outreach becomes easier when those relationships are established, when trust is established, et cetera. But it really has to start. I mean, that's you started with this question, Uche, about relationships, and it takes time and energy, but those are the key to then moving out, and the kind of common humanity, as Aysha was saying, can be the starting point for reaching out and healing more broadly, or addressing issues in the family or in the community, et cetera.
So I'm looking at a time, we're almost out. So I have one last question I want to ask. Staying on this topic of relationships and the culture we're trying to build. And like you said, Mark, it's hard and it takes a lot of time and focus. And it's not happening a lot, because I was just having lunch with a former principal I work with, and she was great at relationships, but she also worked like 20 hours a day, and we can't ask everybody to do that. And she was amazing in the work that she did. Yeah. So if there's one thing in the context that we're in of this, that we described, this context of stacked crises, that you might recommend maybe as a starting point for schools that may feel overwhelmed. Mark, maybe if you can go first, and then Aysha.
I would say, again, it's like a broken record here, but I think, really listen to students, making them feel like they're really being heard and being, taken seriously, and working on that, and as the basis for a genuine relationship between teachers and students that then can expand out, I would say.
Aysha?
Yeah, I will just say, I don't think any of this works without relationship, and not transactional relationship. Right. I mean, sometimes, I just need to borrow a pen. You have a pen. Give me that pen. But if it's, I think if that shared valuing around the essentiality of relationship as like the core thing that schooling sprouts out from, and like the human experience, I think that opens the way. It doesn't mean having to fake or feign friendships with folks, but I think understanding our shared goals and outcomes of having schooling be a beautiful experience allows for people to connect. And then also, I think making sure that if you find this community inside the place where you work, that's great. But I also think in terms of the importance of having some type of community or place to go to where you can get refueled as the adult, right? Like there are some times you can find that inside of your work fam, but I think it's absolutely important to do that, so then you can see the people that you work with in the light that is actually most productive and constructive, versus like, there's Monday through Friday friend again. Oh gosh, here we go. So, making sure that people are feeding their social needs, their communal needs outside of the building. I find that allows for you to like relate to people more genuinely inside of it.
These are both very powerful statements. And I guess I'm left wondering, and this isn't a question because we don't have time, but maybe this is something that we all can kind of ponder. it's hard. You've given a lot of very clear strategies. How do we build the capacity and provide support to school leaders, district leaders to prioritize relationships when there are these other challenges or these other priorities that may be kind of pushing them to deprioritize, whether explicitly or implicitly? Because it is very clear, you've all made a very strong argument for why focusing on building these cultures and these relationships is essential to responding to the trauma and experiences of both students and adults. So I want to thank both of you for joining us this afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on your time zone. And I hope to continue this conversation in the future. And to all of you who joined us in the Q&A, we try to pull in some of your questions. I'm sure we didn't get to all of them, but we will look through as many as we can and see if we can provide some responses later on. But again, thank you all so much. Mark and Aysha, you were fabulous.
Thank
or
you.
What was it, artistic auntie and amazing Mark. Great.
Amazing,
So thank you all for
yes.
joining, and we will see you all at the next Education Now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.